The message arrived on a Tuesday. Captain Tejo was sitting in his chair on the bridge of the HSS Jindo, drinking cold coffee and watching the stars drift past the viewport. The ship was docked at Relay Station Gamma, a massive floating structure at the edge of Council space, where species from across the galaxy came to trade, argue, and pretend they liked each other. Tejo did not pretend. He sat quietly, watched everything, and spoke only when it mattered. Lieutenant Yuna was the first to see the transmission. She was young, sharp, and fluent in 11 galactic trade languages. She had learned most of them out of spite, because a Velith diplomat once told her that humans lacked the mental capacity for proper linguistic study. She had learned his language in 6 weeks and sent him a thank you note in perfect Velith grammar. He never spoke to her again. The transmission was long. It was formal. It was decorated with the seals of the Galactic Council. All 312 of them, stamped in holographic gold, like the universe itself had signed it. Yuna read it twice, to make sure she understood. Then she stood up from her station, and walked to Tejo's chair. "Captain," she said, "you need to see this." Tejo took the datapad from her hand, and read. His face did not change. It never did. He could have been reading a grocery list, or a death sentence, and his expression would have been the same. When he finished, he stood up and walked to the diplomatic quarters at the rear of the ship, where Ambassador Dohan was reading a paper book, an old habit he refused to give up. Dohan was 73 years old. He had white hair, thin hands, and eyes that looked gentle until you realized they were watching everything. He had served Earth's diplomatic corps for over 40 years. He had negotiated trade deals, border disputes, and one very tense hostage situation involving a misunderstanding about cheese. He was patient, kind, and absolutely impossible to push around. Tejo handed him the datapad without a word. Dohan put down his book, placed his reading glasses on his nose, and read the message. It was called a tribute order. The Galactic Council, in its ancient wisdom, was informing humanity that as a newly admitted species, it was required to surrender 30% of its home system's raw resources. It was also required to hand over 10% of its fleet. And it was required to grant permanent basing rights to Council enforcement ships within sovereign human space. This was described as the cost of civilization. It was described as the price of peace. It was described as the duty of all species who wish to stand among the stars. Every species in the history of the Council had received this order. Every species had complied. Some had done so with joy, eager to prove their loyalty. Some had done so with bitterness, knowing they had no choice. But all of them, without exception, had knelt. Dohan read the document from beginning to end. He removed his glasses. He folded them carefully and placed them on the table beside his book. Then he looked at Tejo. "Get me a line to the council chamber," he said. It took 20 minutes to establish the connection. The council chamber on the capital world of Seraphis was enormous. It was built to hold representatives of over 300 species, and it was designed to make visitors feel small. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into shadow. The seats rose in rings like a stadium, and at the center, standing on a raised platform under a single beam of cold white light, was where the speaker was expected to stand. Dohan stood there now, or at least his holographic image did. He was projected into the chamber at full size, which meant he was about 100 times smaller than most of the beings looking down at him. He did not seem to mind. Counselor Ravan presided over the session. Ravan was Velith, an insectoid species that had been part of the council for 6,000 years. He was tall, thin, and covered in a dark exoskeleton that clicked when he moved. His voice was deep and carried the weight of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. Beside him sat Arbiter Malkai, the council's chief enforcer. Molkai was Keshari, a reptilian species known for their military strength and their complete lack of patience. He was broad, scarred, and looked at Dowan the way a predator looks at something too small to be worth eating, but annoying enough to crush. Ravan spoke first. He read the terms of the tribute order aloud, slowly, as if speaking to a child. He listed each requirement. He explained the history. He described the honor of being allowed to contribute. And then, with the practiced tone of someone who already knew the answer, he asked for Earth's formal acceptance. The chamber waited. 300 species looked down at the tiny human standing in the light. Dowan smiled. It was a small smile, warm and polite, the kind of smile a grandfather gives before he tells you something you are not going to enjoy hearing. "I thank the Council for its time and its traditions," he said. His voice was soft but clear, and Yuna's translation systems carried it to every seat in the chamber, in every language spoken. "I have read the tribute order carefully. I have considered its terms, and on behalf of the United Nations of Earth, the combined human fleet, and every man, woman, and child who calls our world home, I give our answer." He paused. Not for drama, not for effect. He paused because he wanted every single being in that chamber to be listening. Then he spoke one word. No. The silence that followed was unlike anything the chamber had ever known. It was not the silence of thought. It was not the silence of consideration. It was the silence of 300 species realizing, all at once, that something had just broken, and none of them knew how to fix it. Ravan's exoskeleton clicked once. Molkai's claws tightened on the arm of his seat, and Ambassador Dowan, still smiling, folded his hands behind his back and waited for whatever came next. For 11 seconds, nobody in the council chamber moved. Yuna counted. She was still on the comm line aboard the Jindo, monitoring the translation feeds, and she counted every second of that silence, because she knew it would matter someday. Then the chamber exploded. Not with weapons, with voices. 300 species began talking, shouting, clicking, growling, and buzzing all at once. The translation systems nearly overloaded. Yuna had to pull her earpiece out because the noise was so loud, it hurt. On the bridge, Captain Tejo looked at her. She held up a finger. Wait. Counselor Ravan struck the ceremonial chime 3 times, and slowly, painfully, the chamber settled into something close to order. His exoskeleton was clicking rapidly, which Yuna knew was a sign of extreme agitation in the Velit species. He stared down at Dohwan's holographic image with all 6 of his eyes. "There appears to be a misunderstanding," Ravan said carefully. Perhaps the translation was imprecise. The tribute order is not a request. It is a requirement. All species comply. This is the way of the council. Dohan nodded politely. The translation was precise. Lieutenant Yuna is very thorough. Our answer is no. We will not surrender our resources. We will not surrender our ships. And we will not allow foreign military vessels to station themselves in our home. Thank you for understanding. Ravan did not understand. Nobody in the chamber understood. This had never happened before. There was no section in the Council's 9,000-year legal code that covered what to do when a species simply refused. The code assumed compliance. It had always assumed compliance. Arbiter Molkai was the first to recover. He leaned forward in his massive seat and spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "You are a small species," he said. 40 years among the stars. You have 42 warships. The Council commands tens of thousands. Consider your position carefully before you speak again. Dowan looked up at Molkai. He was so much smaller that he had to tilt his head back to meet the reptilian's eyes. But he did not look away. "I have considered it," Dowan said. "Our answer is still no. Good day, Arbiter." The hologram vanished. Dowan had ended the call. Aboard the Jindo, Taeho looked at Yuna. Send a priority message to Admiral Jisiok on Earth. Full encryption. Tell him the word has been given. Yuna nodded and began transmitting. On Serathis, the council fell into chaos. Behind the closed doors of private meeting chambers, species that had sat side by side for millennia began to argue. The argument split into 3 groups, and they split fast. The first group was led by Mulkai and his Keshari allies. They wanted war. Immediate, overwhelming military force. Crush the humans. Take their resources, and broadcast the destruction to every species in the galaxy as a reminder of what happened when you said no. Mulkai was furious in a way that went beyond politics. He was personally insulted. He had built his career on enforcing the tribute system. Every species he had broken had added to his legend. The idea that this tiny, fragile, short-lived species would stand in his chamber and refuse him was something he could not accept. The second group was quieter. These were the moderates, species who had always paid their tribute but had never been happy about it. They sat in their seats and watched the chaos, and some of them thought the same thought at the same time. What if the humans are right? What if we should have said no too? They did not speak this thought aloud, not yet. But they thought it, and thoughts like that are dangerous things in a room full of politicians. The third group was the most dangerous of all. These were the opportunists. They did not care about justice or tradition. They saw a small species about to be destroyed, and they wanted a share of the wreckage. If humanity fell, there would be resources to divide, technology to claim, and territory to absorb. They smiled politely and voted with Mulkai, not because they believed in the tribute, but because they believed in profit. Back on Earth, Admiral Jisok received Taeho's message in his office at Fleet Command in the city of Busan. Jisok was 56 years old, built like a tank, and had a scar running from his left ear to his jaw from the Proxima border skirmishes. He read the message, set it down, and called his senior staff into the room. The ambassador said no, he told them. The council will not accept that. We have weeks, maybe months, before they respond with force. We will use every hour. He sent a return message to Taeho aboard the Jindo. It was short. Hold position. Say nothing more. Let them talk themselves into fear. Meanwhile, Dr. Unji was already at work. She was Earth's chief intelligence analyst, and she had spent 20 years studying the Council's military structures. She was thin, quiet, and wore glasses she did not need because she thought they made people underestimate her. She had files on every major Council fleet, their command structures, their supply chains, their weaknesses. And she had found many weaknesses. She briefed Taeho and Do-hwan that evening in the captain's quarters. The Council's combined military is enormous on paper, she said. Over 10,000 capital ships from dozens of species. But they have not fought a real war in over 2,000 years. Their fleets do not train together. Their communication systems are incompatible. Their supply chains are separate. They are a parade army. They look impressive until someone actually fights back. Trade Minister Suho, who had joined the briefing via secure channel from Earth, added his own weapon to the table. He was 29, the youngest trade minister in Earth's history, and he had a gift for numbers that bordered on frightening. He had already begun sending polite, detailed economic reports to every council member nation. Each report showed exactly how much trade revenue that species earned from human commerce. The numbers were large. The implication was simple. You need us more than you think. The council gave humanity 90 days. The ultimatum came through on a formal channel, stamped with Mulkai's personal seal. Comply within 90 days, or face the full military force of the Galactic Council. Yuna received it, decoded it, and brought it to Taeho. He read it and passed it to Do-hwan. The old ambassador read it slowly, set it down, and said, "Acknowledge receipt. Nothing more. Page." Yuna sent the reply. 2 words. Message received. Somewhere on Serathis, Molkai read those 2 words, and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He could not name it. He had never needed to. But if he had been human, he would have recognized it immediately. It was doubt. On the first day of the ultimatum, Earth did not panic. It did not beg. It did not send a second message to the Council asking for more time or better terms. Instead, it went to work. Admiral Jisok stood in the war room deep beneath Fleet Command in Busan and stared at the holographic map of the solar system. Every planet, every moon, every asteroid belt, every orbital station floated in blue light before him. He knew this system the way a man knows his own home. He knew where the doors were. He knew where the walls were. And he knew exactly where to put the traps. "We cannot match them in open space," he told his officers. "We have 42 capital ships. They will bring over 1,000. If we meet them in the open, we lose. So we will not meet them in the open. We will make them come to us. And we will make them pay for every kilometer." The plan was simple in concept and brutal in execution. Earth would not fight a battle. Earth would fight a war of bleeding. Every layer of the solar system would become a weapon. The outermost layer belonged to Engineer Qunam. He was 41 years old, thin as a wire, and had not taken a vacation in 7 years. The orbital defense grid was his life's work, and he had been building it since the day humanity first realized that the galaxy was not a friendly place. The grid was not a wall, it was a maze. Thousands of stealth mines scattered across billions of kilometers of space, each one silent, invisible, and patient. Behind the mines were automated weapons platforms that could track and fire on hundreds of targets simultaneously. Behind those were electromagnetic disruption fields that could blind sensors and scramble communications. Qunam had designed it all, and he had designed it to be ugly. "Pretty defenses lose wars," he told his team as they worked around the clock to activate dormant systems and deploy new ones. "I built this to make admirals cry." Aboard the Jindo, still docked at Relay Station Gamma, Sergeant Hana drilled her Marines every single day. Hana was 32, strong, and had a voice that could cut through a hull breach alarm. She had joined the Marines at 18 and had fought in 3 engagements before she was 25. She knew what combat looked like. More importantly, she knew what it smelled like, sounded like, and felt like when the gravity failed and the lights went out. Her squad trained in zero gravity, in darkness, in smoke-filled corridors, and in simulated hull breaches. They trained to board enemy ships, to disable command centers, and to fight in environments designed for species twice their size. Hana pushed them hard because she loved them, and because she knew that kindness in training meant death in battle. "Listen to me," she told them one evening, when they were bruised and exhausted and lying on the deck of the training bay. "Every species out there thinks we are soft. They think we are small. They think we are young and stupid and scared. And when they come for us, they are going to learn something that no amount of intelligence reports could have taught them. They are going to learn what happens when you corner something that refuses to die." Nobody laughed. Nobody needed to. They understood. While the military prepared, Ambassador Dohan fought his own war with quieter weapons. He began reaching out to the moderate species on the council, the ones who had paid their tribute but had never stopped resenting it. He did not ask them for help. He did not ask them for alliance. He asked them for something much simpler. "When the vote comes," he told each one in private, encrypted conversations, "I am not asking you to stand with us. I am only asking you to do nothing. Abstain. Stay silent. That will be enough." An alliance against the council would frighten the moderates into compliance. But doing nothing? That was easy. That required no courage at all. And yet, if enough species did nothing, the coalition against humanity would be hollow at its center. Dr. Unji added fuel to the fire. She had spent 20 years collecting intelligence, and now she began to spend it. Carefully, quietly, through channels that could never be traced back to Earth, she leaked documents showing that Molkai's Kashari Empire had been skimming tribute resources from other species for centuries. The numbers were damning. The Kashari had taken far more than their share, and they had used it to build their own military while their so-called allies grew weaker. The leaks spread like poison through the Council's back channels. Species that had trusted the Kashari for generations began to ask questions. Trust that had taken centuries to build began to crack in days. Trade Minister Suho delivered the economic blow. He was young, but he understood money the way a surgeon understands a body, and he knew exactly where to cut. Over the course of 3 weeks, he rerouted Earth's most critical exports through neutral third-party species. Human medicines, quantum processors, agricultural gene modifications, all of it now flowed through middlemen who had no stake in the conflict. If the Council wanted to sanction Earth, they would have to sanction their own allies first. The economic web was tangled so tightly that pulling one thread would unravel a dozen others. On the Council side, Molkai assembled his armada. He called upon the loyal species, the ones who feared him or owed him, and he demanded ships. Over 1,000 vessels were pledged from 40 different species. It was an impressive number. Molkai looked at the fleet roster and felt powerful. Unji looked at the same roster and saw the truth. Half the contributing species had sent their oldest ships, the ones they could afford to lose. The fleet had no unified command structure. 40 different species meant 40 different communication systems, 40 different tactical doctrines, and 40 different ideas about who was actually in charge. They had never trained together. They had never fought together. They were a crowd, not an army. The days counted down. 50 days, 30 days, 10 days. On Earth, people looked up at the sky and knew what was coming. There was fear. Of course there was fear. But there was also something else, something harder to name. It was the feeling of a people who had been told to kneel, and had chosen to stand instead. It was not courage exactly. It was stubbornness. It was the deep, quiet, unbreakable stubbornness of a species that had survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and its own stupidity, and had kept going every single time. On day 90, the Armada jumped to the edge of Earth's solar system. Over 1,000 ships appeared on the long-range sensors, like a swarm of angry stars. Admiral Gisiok stood in the war room and watched them arrive. He was calm. He had been calm for 90 days. He had done everything he could do. His people were ready. His defenses were set. His fleet was positioned. He opened a system-wide broadcast. "You are entering sovereign human space," he said. His voice was steady and carried no anger, no fear, no bluff. "You have not been invited. You will not be welcomed. Turn back, or we will interpret your advance as an act of war and respond accordingly." The Armada did not turn back. Gisiok closed the channel. He nodded once. "So be it," he said. And the stars went to war. The Armada came in like a fist. Over 1,000 ships in tight formation, their hulls gleaming with the colors and markings of 40 species, their weapons charged, their commanders confident. They had the numbers. They had the size. They had 9,000 years of galactic authority behind them. They expected resistance. They expected a fight. What they got was something else entirely. They got Qunam's welcome. The first mines detonated 6 minutes after the Armada crossed into the outer perimeter. They were small, no bigger than a man's fist, and they had been floating in the darkness for years, silent and cold, and invisible to every sensor the Council had ever built. They did not destroy ships. They were not designed to. They hit engines. They hit sensor arrays. They hit communication dishes. 43 ships were crippled in the first wave alone, drifting and blind, their crews screaming into dead radios. For the first time since it had formed, it stopped. Commanders from 40 species began shouting over overlapping frequencies, demanding information, issuing contradictory orders, and blaming each other. Nobody knew what had hit them. Nobody knew where the mines were. Nobody knew if there were more. There were more. There were thousands more. Mulcahy, aboard his flagship, the Iron Verdict, ordered the fleet to push forward. He was not a fool. He knew that stopping in a minefield was worse than advancing through one. But the advance was slow now, cautious, and caution was exactly what Admiral Gsok had wanted. Gsok watched from the war room as the Armada crawled through the outer perimeter, losing ships with every kilometer. He waited. He was very good at waiting. He had learned patience in the Proxima skirmishes, where a wrong move meant death, and a right move meant survival. He watched the formation stretch and thin, as faster ships pulled ahead, and slower ships fell behind. He watched the gaps form between the 40 different fleets, and when the gaps were wide enough, he gave the order, "Release the wolf packs." 12 destroyer groups, each consisting of 3 fast, heavily armed ships, launched from hidden positions behind asteroids and dead moons across the outer system. They hit the Armada from 12 directions at once. They did not aim for warships. They aimed for supply vessels, communication relays, and command ships. They struck fast, fired everything they had, and vanished back into the dark before the Armada could even turn its guns. The effect was devastating. 3 supply convoys were destroyed in the first hour. Without supplies, the outer fleet groups began to slow. Without communication relays, entire sections of the Armada lost contact with each other. A fleet from the Vorith Collective, confused by the chaos, fired on a fleet from the Drenari Republic, thinking they were human ships. 11 Drenari vessels were damaged before the mistake was corrected. The Drenari commander, furious, pulled his entire fleet out of formation and refused to advance. Mulcahy screamed orders. He demanded unity. He demanded discipline. But discipline requires trust, and trust requires training, and this fleet had never trained together, never fought together, never learned to read each other's signals. They were strangers in a dark room, armed and terrified, and they were beginning to turn on each other. Aboard the Jindo, Captain Tejo watched the battle unfold on the tactical display. He had been holding his ship in reserve, tucked behind Earth's moon with a small escort group. His orders from Gsok were clear. Wait. The Jindo was not the biggest ship in the fleet. It was not the most heavily armed. But it was fast, tough, and crewed by people who had been drilled until they could fight in their sleep. Tejo trusted his ship. He trusted his crew. And he waited. Sergeant Hana waited too, but not patiently. She stood in the Marine Bay with her squad, fully armed, fully suited, bouncing on her toes with the terrible energy of someone who wanted very badly to do violence to something. Her squad watched her and fed on her energy. They were ready. The Armada pushed deeper. It was bleeding now, losing ships in 1s and 2s and 5s, but it still had numbers. Hundreds of warships pushed past the outer perimeter and into the middle system, and there they met the second layer of hell. Qunam's automated weapons platforms opened fire. They rose from the surfaces of asteroids and dead moons, like buried animals waking from a long sleep. They fired in overlapping patterns, creating kill zones that no single ship could survive. The platforms were not smart. They did not need to be. They just needed to shoot, and they shot at everything that was not broadcasting a human identification signal. At the same time, the electromagnetic disruption fields activated. Sensors went blind across half the Armada. Navigation systems failed. Ships that had been flying in tight formation suddenly could not see each other. 2 Kashari cruisers collided at full speed. Both were destroyed. The Armada's advance broke. It did not shatter all at once. It broke the way ice breaks, slowly at first, and then all at once. Species began pulling back without orders. The Vorith left first, then the Telmari. then a dozen smaller fleets that decided their tribute to the Council did not include dying in a human minefield. Mulcahy refused to retreat. The Iron Verdict pushed forward with his Kashari Guard fleet, the only ships still under unified command. They were good ships, well crewed, and Mulcahy was a real warrior, whatever else could be said about him. He pushed through the weapons platforms. He pushed through the disruption fields. He brought his fleet within sight of Earth itself. And there, Gisiok played his final card. The orbital defense grid activated at full power. Every platform, every turret, every railgun and missile battery that ringed Earth's orbit came alive at the same moment. The sky around Earth turned white with fire. Mulcahy's guard fleet, already battered, flew straight into the most concentrated killing field any of them had ever seen. Ships died in seconds. The Keshari heavy cruiser Boneclaw was hit by 11 railgun rounds simultaneously and split in half. The destroyer Fang of Keshar lost its entire forward section to a missile barrage. Mulcahy watched his fleet die around him and kept pushing, because he was Keshari, and Keshari did not retreat. Teho moved. The Jindo came around the moon at full burn, engines screaming, weapons hot. Teho had waited for this moment. He had waited for Mulcahy to be alone, stripped of allies, surrounded by wreckage, committed and unable to turn back. The Jindo closed the distance in minutes. "Target their engines," Teho said. "Then their weapons. I want that ship alive." The Jindo hit the Iron Verdict with surgical precision. Engine pods shattered. Weapon arrays went dark. The flagship drifted, powerless, its hull groaning. Hana and her Marines boarded 11 minutes later. They moved through the ship like water through cracks, fast and unstoppable. Keshari warriors fought back, but they fought in confusion, in darkness, in a ship that was dying around them. Hana's squad reached the command bridge in under 8 minutes. She kicked open the door and found Mulcahy standing in the center of the room, alone, his officers dead or surrendered around him. He looked down at her. She was half his size. "Surrender your vessel," she said. Mulcahy stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he lowered his weapon. Teho opened a channel from the Jindo. "Your fleet is broken. Your allies have left you. You are disabled in our space, breathing because we allow it. This is over, Arbiter." The battle had lasted 6 hours. The Armada had lost over 300 ships. Humanity had lost 19. The rest of the Council fleet was scattered across the outer system, running for the nearest jump point, desperate to leave. Lieutenant Yuna broadcast on every galactic frequency, her voice calm and clear in all 11 trade languages. "This engagement is concluded. Humanity did not seek this war. We sought only to be left in peace. That remains our sole demand." The galaxy listened, and for the second time in 3 months, it had no idea what to say. The wreckage drifted for weeks. Broken hulls and shattered engines and frozen clouds of atmosphere that had once been the insides of ships. Earth's recovery teams worked day and night, pulling survivors from the debris regardless of species. Human medical ships treated wounded Keshari soldiers beside wounded Vorath engineers, beside wounded Drenari pilots. No one was turned away. No one was left to die. This confused the galaxy more than the battle itself. On Serapis, the council chamber was quieter than it had been in 9,000 years. Seats that had always been full were empty. Representatives who had always spoken with confidence now whispered. The great seals on the walls, all 312 of them, seemed duller somehow, as if the gold had lost its shine. Councillor Ravan stood at his podium and tried to hold things together. He was old, even by Velith standards, and he had spent his entire life believing that the council was eternal, that its systems were just, and that the tribute order was the foundation upon which galactic peace was built. Now that foundation had a crack running through it, and every day the crack grew wider. The moderate species moved first, the ones Ambassador Dohan had spoken to in those quiet, encrypted conversations during the 90 days. They had done exactly what he asked. They had done nothing. They had not sent ships to the Armada. They had not voted for the ultimatum. They had simply sat in their seats and stayed silent. And now, with the Armada broken and scattered, their silence turned into something louder. The Telmari delegation stood up in open session and demanded a full audit of the tribute system. They wanted to know where the resources had gone. They wanted to know who had profited. They pointed to the intelligence that Dr. Unji had leaked, the documents showing centuries of Keshari skimming, and they demanded answers. Then the Dranari stood up. Then the Vorith. Then a dozen more. Within a week, 47 species had formally withdrawn from the tribute order. They did not withdraw with anger. They withdrew with the exhausted relief of people who had been carrying a heavy weight for a very long time, and had finally been given permission to set it down. Ravan tried to maintain order. He called for calm. He called for tradition. He called for unity. But his voice was tired, and the chamber could hear it. On a quiet evening, 3 weeks after the battle, he walked into the council's private archives, removed his ceremonial chain of office, and placed it on the table. He left a short message for his successor, whoever that might be. It said, "I held this seat for 200 years. I thought I was protecting civilization. I was protecting a system that fed on the weak. I am sorry." Then he left the chamber and did not return. Molkai's fall was less dignified. The Keshari Empire, shamed by the defeat and by the corruption that Yunji's leaks had exposed, turned on him with the speed and cruelty that only deeply embarrassed people can manage. His own generals arrested him. His own government stripped him of rank. He was brought before a Keshari tribunal, charged with misuse of tribute resources, abuse of authority, and leading the empire into an unnecessary and humiliating military disaster. He was sentenced to exile on a barren moon at the edge of Keshari space. He went without protest. There was nothing left to protest. The galaxy watched all of this and waited to see what humanity would do next. This was the part everyone feared. Every species in the chamber, even the ones who had supported humanity's stand, expected the same thing: conquest. That was the pattern. That was how power worked. You fought, you won, and then you took everything you could carry. The strong ruled the weak. The council had done it for 9,000 years. Surely humanity would do the same. Ambassador Dohan was invited to address the full assembly. He accepted. He took a shuttle to Serathis, walked through the empty corridors of the council building, and stood once again on the small platform at the center of the chamber, under that single beam of cold white light. He looked older than he had 3 months ago. His hair was thinner. His hands shook slightly. But his eyes were the same, gentle and watchful. And when he spoke, his voice carried the way it always had, soft and clear and impossible to ignore. "I know what you expect," he said. "You expect us to take your seats. You expect us to write new laws with our names on them. You expect us to replace your chains with ours." He paused and looked up at the hundreds of faces looking down at him. "We will not." The chamber was silent. Not the shocked silence of 3 months ago. A different silence. A listening silence. "We did not fight to rule you," Dowan continued. "We did not fight to humiliate you. We fought because a free people must never kneel to those who demand submission as the price of peace. That is all. We will not take your tribute. We will not take your worlds. We will not take your sovereignty. We ask only what we have always asked, to stand among you as equals, nothing more, nothing less." He stepped down from the platform and walked back to his shuttle. The chamber sat in silence for a long time after he left. In the months that followed, something remarkable happened. It happened slowly, the way all real change happens, not with a single dramatic moment, but with 1,000 small decisions made by 1,000 different people who were tired of the old way and ready for something new. Not just humans, but Telmari and Dranari and Vorith and dozens of other species who had spent centuries paying tribute and staying quiet. Together, they drafted a new agreement. They called it the Galactic Compact. It was shorter than the old Council Charter. It had fewer seals and less gold. But it said something the old charter had never said. No species shall be compelled to kneel. The compact established mutual defense. It established free trade. It established the principle that sovereignty was not something earned through payment, but something that existed by right. It was not perfect. No document written by hundreds of different species could be perfect. But it was honest. And after 9,000 years of the tribute system, honesty felt like a revolution. Humanity was offered the presidency of the new compact. Every species in the coalition wanted humans to lead, because humans had been the ones brave enough or stubborn enough to say the word that started everything. Dohan declined. Instead, he nominated a young diplomat from the Merith, a small species that had been paying tribute for 800 years and had been too afraid to ever complain. The Merith diplomat was young, nervous, and completely overwhelmed. Dohan put a hand on her shoulder and said, "This was never about us. It was about all of you." The Merith diplomat was elected by unanimous vote. She cried during her acceptance speech. Nobody minded. 6 months after the battle, a new station was built in Earth's solar system. It was constructed in the debris field where the fighting had been heaviest, assembled from salvaged wreckage and new materials brought by dozens of species. They called it Unity Station. It was not beautiful. It was rough and uneven, and it looked like it had been built by people who cared more about meaning than appearance. A memorial wall listed every name of every being who had died in the battle, human and council alike, without distinction. Captain Tejo stood on the observation deck of the Jindo, docked at the new station, and looked out at the stars. The ship was quieter now. The guns were cold. The Marines were on leave. Sergeant Hana had taken her squad to Earth for their first real vacation in a year. Engineer Kunam had already started designing upgrades to the defense grid, because Kunam did not know how to stop working. Trade Minister Suho was somewhere on Serathis, negotiating the first trade agreements under the new compact, probably terrifying people with spreadsheets. Dr. Unji had disappeared into her intelligence work again, quiet as always. Lieutenant Yuna walked onto the observation deck and stood beside Tejo. They watched the stars together, in comfortable silence. "Think they will remember what we did here?" she asked. Tejo did not answer right away. He looked at the memorial wall, visible through the viewport, names glowing softly in the dark. He thought about Dohan standing alone in that enormous chamber. He thought about Jisok's steady voice giving the order. He thought about Hana kicking open the door of the iron verdict. He thought about all the small, quiet, stubborn decisions that had brought them to this moment. "They will remember we said no," he said. "That is enough." Yuna nodded. She looked out at the stars, the same stars that every species in the galaxy shared, and she smiled.